Okay. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to We'll Work for Food, the New Possibilities Hour. Today is November 11th, 2021, and it is indeed our honor today to have a special guest this week, Alessandra Mourão and Eduardo Hidal, who are joining us from Brazil. But before we get going, let's see, Natalie, what are the numbers today of donations that people have told you about?
Thanks, Jean. I love this part of We'll Work for Food. So on my little magic tally sheet for this week, we as a community have donated $206,712, or rather $206,712 to food banks all over the world, which means that as a community, we've provided more than 2 million meals to those of our colleagues who are food insecure. Thank you all so much for your generosity. We really do appreciate it. And we look forward to having our colleagues in Brazil talk to us and helping us to raise even more money for their preferred food banks, which I right now have just put into the chat, and they will, I'm sure, tell us about.
Oh, that's so fantastic. Thank you, everyone. The generosity is just amazing. And the reach, how global this is just amazing. And I hope we all appreciate each other and that. And again, this number is just what people have told Natalie about. Those of you who are regulars would know this, but let me just remind everyone how We'll Work for Food started in the spring of 2020 in response to the global pandemic as a way to help our neighbors and to give back. And it has evolved into this weekly presentation by one of our wonderful colleagues, or several of our wonderful colleagues each week, who will speak on some topic of interest. There's no charge for these programs, and the only request is, if you are so inclined, that you make a donation in some amount, however big or small, to either the food bank of the speakers or to your own personal preferred food bank. And your generosity, again, is so appreciated. Well, today we have a very international program coming to us from Latin America, from Brazil. Alessandra Mourão and Eduardo Hidal. They're presenting on one mediator, one negotiator, and one thought-provoking conversation. Both of these speakers are professors and practitioners of negotiation and mediation, and they will discuss the beauty and challenges of mediation and negotiation inside and outside of the Brazilian court system. But their interest and involvement goes well beyond the Brazilian court system. They have backgrounds that are truly international and have been very active in all kinds of things. I would urge you to look them up on LinkedIn and to reach out and connect with each of them. So with that, why don't I turn this over to you, Alessandra, and you can tell us about your food bank, and then the floor is yours and Eduardo's, and we thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jean. Thank you very much, Natalie, for inviting both of us for this contribution here. I was telling you before we went on that I was just having lunch with my kids, and I was telling them how privileged we are to have a nice table for lunch, and that I was going to leave them before lunch was over to help other people to have food on the table as well. And it made me really feel so good, because my kids go like, "Go for it, Mom. I'm proud of you. We can finish lunch." And then later on, you tell us a little bit more about it and about the initiative. So it's a pleasure and also an honor to be here. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate you for the initiative. Eduardo and I we have been teaching negotiations and mediations. In the very beginning, we were teaching negotiations together, but later on, Eduardo moved more focused on the mediation side. And I was telling him, well, why don't we just contribute to this initiative with a little bit of our experience, what we have here, and let people know around the world what we've been doing, what is it like down here in our jurisdiction, in our region. And when I was invited to think of a food bank that could benefit from this program, I thought of one NGO we have down here, which is called Banco de Alimentos, which means exactly the food bank. That this is the name of the NGO. They are 23 years old, meaning that they've been doing their job, feeding people around this area for 23 years already. Very serious group of people. Just to give you an idea of the importance of their work, I was taking a look at their October report, and their work and donations and everything they've done have benefited 50,000 people last month. Last month, they have distributed around 5,000 boxes of basic food for several families. So they've been doing a great job, and I truly believe they deserve your contributions to keep moving forward with their work. So this is the food bank I would recommend people that would like to make donations in exchange for our talks today. If you could, I would strongly recommend the Brazilian NGO called Banco de Alimentos.
Well, that's fantastic. Thank you. We'll do that again. The link is in the chat for everybody who would be looking for it. And if you would be so kind as to let Natalie, the founder of We'll Work for Food, know the amount of your contribution, then we'll be able to add that to our running total. Thank you so much. Well, how about if you take that floor back and tell us all about negotiation and life in Brazil. Thank you so much.
Okay, good. Well, after the introduction of the food bank, I'd like to take this time to talk to my dear friend Eduardo Hidal about what we've been doing here in this area. 20 or so years ago, I wrote my first book on negotiations, and it was a book for lawyers, negotiation for lawyers. And believe it or not, 20 years ago, it was the very first book on negotiation for lawyers. My background is in law. That's what I practice every single day. And pretty much like any other lawyer, I could feel that our judiciary system was not able to handle all the cases. To give you an overview of what our jurisdiction is like, I went after some data, some numbers that could give you an idea of the size of the problem we have to solve down here. Last year, in the year 2020, 26 million new lawsuits were filed in this country. 26 million new cases only in the year of 2020. Of course, at the moment, we have around 80 million cases in progress, lawsuits in our courts. So you can have an idea how impossible it is to hire enough judges to take care of all cases. On the other hand, because our culture is not a culture of settlement, not yet, of alternative dispute resolution, a very small percentage of those cases actually settle. This is one huge problem. I know that in the States, for example, you have a large amount of cases being filed every day, but the settlement percentage you have is much higher than what we have here. So in face of such a situation, I decided to get involved with alternative dispute resolution, the ADRs, and more specifically with negotiations. Then I started inviting myself, volunteering to teach negotiations. And it was funny that I received several no's. People just telling me 20 years ago, saying, well, this is not lawyers' business. This is just for business administrators, other people, but not for lawyers. So this can give you an idea of how new this whole thing is for Brazilian legal professionals, judges, our court system. It's been developing really fast, but it's quite new still. We have in our country, I will ask Natalie, I'm sorry, but it's a professor's mania here. Do you have any idea how many lawyers there are in Brazil? If you had to guess how many lawyers we have here, Natalie, how many you think we have?
Brazil is a huge country. I'm going to estimate that you have 325,000 attorneys nationwide.
This is good number, 325. This is very precise. Well, believe it or not, we are 1.2 million. We are 1.2 million lawyers in this country without reasonable training in negotiations and mediation. So there is a lot of room for progress here, as you can see. When we think of law schools, we have 1,200 law schools in this country. At the moment, the figures I have here is that 1.3% of our GIP is consumed by the judiciary system. So you see, there is a whole bunch of problems to manage, a whole bunch of professionals to train, and a whole bunch of opportunities. This is important, and that's why Eduardo and I got involved in it. We could see the opportunities in training and bringing the word of alternatives to dispute resolution, and also saving our judiciary system, because you know, without these alternatives, everything would really panic, would stop. It would be impossible to move forward. So that's how I began. Nowadays, I teach negotiations. I see here Marcelo Perman. I see a former student of mine, and nowadays an excellent mediator as well here in Brazil. Nice to see you here, Marcelo. And Eduardo can also maybe add a little bit on how he sees also mediation, how it's been developing lately, and also bring news about a federal law we have now regulating mediation in this country. So you see, it's not a long history, but very dynamic. A lot has been happening lately. Eduardo.
Okay. My background is in finance. I used to work for a large bank for a number of years. And then eventually I moved to negotiations and mediation. And then that's how I got to meet with Alessandra. We have a mediation law here in Brazil for about 5 years. Which is relatively new. Arbitration has been around for more than 20 years. And eventually arbitration evolved to become a very litigant kind of thing, basically applied to very large disputes, and it became very expensive. So, of course, the cheapest way to solve a problem is through negotiation, and then you move to mediation, and then from there on to arbitration. The fact that we have a new law here, a relatively new law, gave credibility to mediation, which we didn't used to have before. I would say that as of June this year, Brazil was signed the Singapore Convention, which also adds the credibility to mediation settlements. Not that Brazilian law did not provide for the effectiveness of mediation, but it just gives companies that do business in Brazil and are not especially familiar with the Brazilian law system, it gives them an added comfort to do mediation in Brazil. Still, as Alessandra just said, mediation is not still very well known, which provides a lot of opportunities for growth.
Yeah, I truly believe, Eduardo, that the younger lawyers, the younger legal professionals are much more aware of what's going on and much more interested. In the beginning, I used to teach mainly for post-graduation courses, and the ones that were interested in a negotiation or mediation were lawyers and practitioners that were already frustrated with trying to solve the conflicts through the local courts, and they were trying to get new skills, trying to help their clients using different alternatives. But as the time was passing by, more and more I feel that my students are getting younger and willing to know more about the alternative dispute resolution systems outside the courts. So nowadays, my perception is that very young legal professionals are already thinking of solving the disputes in a more efficient, low-cost, alternative way. So it's something that I've been feeling as time went by. I remember in the very first days, I would beg to teach. I would beg for classes. I would beg for attention. Whereas nowadays, I just don't have enough time to reply to all invitations. Law schools all over the country are willing to bring negotiation, mediation, arbitration, other alternative models to the law schools. So I am very happy to see how fast we are moving. And the figures I have shared with you probably gave you an idea of the need to do so. With such large figures in terms of demands and the legal community, of course, we must go after these alternatives in a more efficient way. And as a practitioner, Eduardo, more and more, I see it as a point of interest from my clients. My clients many times came after the firm, not because we are good litigators, but because we are good negotiators, because we're very helpful in mediations. So you see that companies' time and the court's time, they are not even close to each other. The courts go real slow. They take very long to respond to the needs of the parties. And the businesses, they do need a much faster response. And when we think, and as I was introducing this talk today to Natalie, when we think how many overseas businesses have offices here, branches, subsidiaries, of course they are interested in knowing, well, if I have a conflict in that country, how long it's gonna take for me to solve it? How much it's gonna cost for me to solve it? So Eduardo, I truly think that when we, and I'm an entrepreneur, I have founded my firm 26 years ago. And this is part of my business. How do I attract my clients? And one of the ways for doing so is offering some efficient way to solve conflicts, not only going through the court system, but doing it, in my case, directly, representing the party. And this is also something of importance. Many people here do not have a clear idea of the difference. They see negotiators and mediators as the same kind of profession. Do you have the same problem, Eduardo? Do you face the same situation that people go after you, a professional mediator, they seek your help when they are sometimes actually looking for a negotiator, and the other way around?
Usually people don't understand the difference between negotiation and mediation. Essentially, people think that both do the same thing. The point is, as everyone here in this conversation knows, is that you go to mediation when you no longer are able to talk productively with the other side. So what the mediator says is help people talk and come up with their own decisions. It gives them a lot more latitude than a judicial decision. It gives them a lot more possibility to tailor the solution to their own needs. So not always a negotiator is able to make progress. And that's especially true when there are subjective issues, not just objective things that can be measured in dollars and cents to be solved. One thing I used to say is that when you're negotiating with somebody and they're just the two of you, when somebody else, the other side is talking, in your brain, in your mind, what you're trying to do is come up with the reasons why you're right and they're wrong. Nevertheless, when there is a third party with enough credibility, when the other side is talking, you try to figure out why is it that they are taking that position? What are their interests? Because you don't want to look bad to that third party, which is the mediator. And when you're talking yourself, you talk it in a different way, a much more respectful way. So essentially, the presence of a third party helps listening and helps talking, which sometimes in negotiation we just don't have.
But don't you think that if we had better training for lawyers, because lawyers are the ones that are there representing the parties, if we had better training, do you think we would need mediation this much?
Sometimes you do. I remember a case where I co-mediator in one of the large chambers here in Brazil. It was basically a supply contract from a foreign exporter and a Brazilian importer. And we walked through all the techniques, which basically to solve the problem. And at the end, after a long time, we found out, just by chance or by inquiry, that the two parties used to be friends. One used to work for the other. I'm talking about the representative in Brazil of a foreign firm and the owner of a local firm. And what ended up happening was they had a split years before. So what one thought of the other is that the other was trying to push the other out of the market. So until we were able to come up to that point, which there was a lot of subjectivity, we couldn't solve the problem. And when that was found out, and we were able to help them talk about it, then it was very easy to come to an agreement. So there are situations, particular situations, where you need a third party. But Alessandra is absolutely right. If people were better trained in negotiations, especially the lawyers who represent the parties, then you probably wouldn't need to go to mediation.
Yeah, some time ago, I had a couple of very experienced mediators in my classroom as students. And it was funny because I approached them and I said, hey, I guess you're here by mistake. I mean, this is a negotiation class and you're well-known mediators. What are you doing here? And then they told me, well, Alessandra, we are here because one thing is when we want to help lawyers to get into the mediation process, we need to know as negotiators what they should know that they don't, and how can we help them be better negotiators, because when they are negotiators, they are representing the party, even within the mediation process. So what we have is, how can I, as a mediator, understand the skills that are missing in the negotiator so that I can help them accomplish a better performance? I thought that was quite an interesting approach from them, trying to understand more about negotiation in order to be better mediators. I thought that was quite interesting. And all the time when my students come to me and ask me, why did I decide to go so much into negotiation instead of exploring more mediation? And I usually tell them, I was born partisan. What do I mean? I always have a side. That's maybe why I'm a lawyer. I'm always on somebody else's side, representing one side. And I know that a mediator needs to be more of, neutral, someone who can see both sides. For me as a mediator, my perspective is, in the end of the day, how can I get a better agreement for the one I represent? Despite the fact that I know that the other side, the person that is on the other side of the table, must be satisfied, must also reach its interests as well. Me, Alessandra, as a negotiator, I'm always trying to get the best possible agreement for the person that I represent. So I think there is a mindset of the negotiator that is different from the mindset of a mediator. When I'm at the table negotiating, I'm the party. And the mediator has to, you know, fight the perspective of being seen as someone defending a party. Because the other day I was saying, it doesn't only matter that you are neutral, but you must be seen as someone neutral, which is also a difficult task, I think, Eduardo, don't you?
Absolutely. That's one of the ways that mediation can fail. So I usually tell people, if at any point you feel that I'm not being equidistant, I'm not being neutral, please let me know. Because if they have it and you don't know about it, then the mediation is going to fail. That's absolutely true. And what we used to say when we're teaching mediation is that you need to know what you can bring into mediation from your background and what you have to leave off. Because there are skills you need to bring into mediation, but there are things that are particular to your prior activity, be it being a lawyer, be it being a psychotherapist, whatever, that you need to leave behind if you are going to be successful in mediation. So absolutely true. The other things that typically make a mediation fail is when the people involved in the problem don't come to the mediation. Because when you're representing somebody as a lawyer, not necessarily the parties need to be there. As a matter of fact, in the United States, usually the parties don't say anything. The lawyers representing them is the one who does the talking. But in mediation, you need the parties to be there and to express their views in their own way. And that means that, as I've already had in one or two cases, you have somebody from the company changing the person who comes to the mediation representing the company. And they don't follow what has happened there. They don't follow the transformation that happens in mediation. And in the end, you have a failed mediation. So you really need the parties to come to the table. At least that's the way we do it here in Brazil.
You know, another thing that has been of great interest down here, and it's maybe worth sharing with you from other regions of the planet, is that, like I said, for the past 20 years, things have been changing very fast. We mentioned here the mediation law, and it's a federal law, so it applies to all states in the country. And other laws have come in the past years. And these new laws have been demanding legal professionals to negotiate. And especially public servants, civil servants, government lawyers, they left law school with the dogma that they were not supposed to negotiate anything. A public asset is non-negotiable. This is how they left law school. And then, as time goes by, these new laws come up with the opportunity to negotiate leniency, agreements, tax, debts, and several other things that when I left law school were non-negotiable. Now imagine this practitioner is kind of lost. They don't know how to do, they don't know how to communicate with the other side. And this in negotiations down here, I would say it's a great challenge. Communications. See, we all know that attacking the other side, filing petitions, being aggressive either with the other side is something that a litigator does in a very comfortable way. But then they are supposed to sit down and negotiate and speak directly with the other side, and they just don't know how to do it. I sometimes joke with my students that there are professionals here that speak the same way they write a memo. They look like a live memo, you know, or a live petition. They don't know how to make a conversation, a natural conversation. So many years of, you know, just training in writing petitions and attacking the other side. So the two great elements of communication and relationship, I would say that for legal professionals, and I'm talking about these 1.2 million community that I mentioned, it's a big challenge. So I think mediators, Eduardo, are very valuable here in the sense that they would help communication and relationship between lawyers that do not have the practice, the skills to really talk to each other. Really.
You're absolutely right, Alessandra, because usually when you file a suit, the relationship ends there. And what you really want to do, especially when you have a long-term relationship, is to keep the relationship going, like a supplier and a buyer, like a partners in a business, like family law. You need to do it in a way that people will continue to have a relationship afterwards. So if you can do it through negotiation, fine. If you cannot do it through negotiation, then going to mediation is the way to preserve these relationships. And as you said, especially when you get old-timer lawyers, they're not familiar with it. So the presence of a third independent party, a neutral party, can help in that particular area.
Of course, Eduardo, I must recognize that lately more and more law schools are bringing negotiation, mediation, and arbitration to their programs. But still, when we think of the whole of the country, because we are both based in São Paulo, we have great law schools. We are avant-garde in terms of, you know, what's being discussed around the world. But the country is much bigger than that. There are many law schools throughout the country that still don't have the same idea of what we are talking about here and don't really think that it's actually necessary. And I also see, and this is something, again, cultural. So at the moment, in my view, there are some professionals, some professors that are very much involved in spreading the word.
Absolutely.
And I'm very happy to see it. Very lots and lots of people really interested in spreading the word, letting other people know about these alternatives.
You froze. Sorry, I can't hear you.
Can't either. Well, I'll tell you, maybe Eduardo, you could answer this one question that's just popped up in the chat. If you know, what is the average age of the 1.2 million attorneys that are out there? Are they tending to be young ones who have not had much experience with this, older ones who don't want to change, or, you know, just what is it that you find is you know, typical age range for the lawyers in Brazil?
It would be a guess, but I've mediated very young lawyers and very old timers. I don't have the figures, but if I were to, Alessandra is saying that her power went down, but she'll come back soon. But going back to your question, if I were to guess, I would say about 40 years old. That's an average. And of course, averages don't tell much about it.
Right. Well, you know, the thing that struck me is your background, for example, here. You have an engineering degree for your undergraduate degree, and then you have an MBA, Master's of Business Administration from Stanford here in the States. And then you went into banking and presumably engineering at some point in your life, started out maybe there, I don't know. But how is it that you ended up with negotiation? Do you find the negotiation skills were used in your work and then ended up doing what you're doing?
Well, I didn't actually work very much in engineering. I started as a sales engineer, and then I went to do my MBA, and then I went into finance. And basically what I did in finance, the most I've done was credit. And when you're talking about credit, at times you have to restructure loans or you have to collect loans. So that's where the interest started from a business perspective. And of course, in that capacity, either drafting up a new credit agreement or restructuring or collecting, I worked very closely with lawyers. So that's where the interest came from. So my perspective is more of a business perspective as opposed to, you know, what lawyers normally do. I used to work with lawyers. I still work with lawyers, but that's where the interest came from.
Oh, that's fascinating. A lot of our attendees are not necessarily lawyers. You know, mediators, you can be a mediator, as you know, without being a lawyer. Absolutely. And so it's nice to see that. Yes. Another thing that really struck me was when Alessandra and you were both talking about negotiation. And I began thinking of movies, you know, with negotiators in them. And there is a movie called The Negotiator, which is pretty fascinating to watch the negotiation process there. But I think my favorite of those is Bridge of Spies with Tom Hanks. Have you seen it? And would you have any comments about the negotiations in there?
No, I haven't seen it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, you need to watch it. It's based on a true story.
I'll do that.
So why don't you take the floor back then and tell us more about what you were going to be telling us about negotiation.
Okay. As I was saying, the mediation law is comparatively new in Brazil, and that's the reason. Well, Alessandra's back now, and that's why it really took quite a while for it to get approved through the legislative process. So, you know, arbitration has evolved in Brazil to becoming more of a process thing. And as a result, it became very expensive. Of course, it's much faster than the regular adjudication process. But it basically made cases which aren't large enough, aren't valuable enough, prohibitive to do an arbitration. And that's basically where mediation has been taking a stance, taking a room for mediation to grow. Alessandra's back now. Can you hear us, Alessandra?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Am I?
So I guess, can you hear me? I guess everybody can hear me, but you, Alessandra.
Yes. She's frozen again. Somewhere those wires, you know, coming up from the south all the way up to California and beyond must have gotten tangled. So
what comes up to is the trend to include negotiation and mediation clauses in the agreements. Of course, you have to take into consideration how much time you will allow one of these alternative procedures to go on. Otherwise, this can go on forever. But there's a trend to include time frames, what we call staggered clauses. When you start with negotiation, when you go to mediation, and if you're going into arbitration or going into the legal system. But that's something that's been taken on. Not everybody is familiar with that here in the country, but it's something that's going on, and I think it's a useful trend to make disputes settle faster and in a less expensive way.
Have you seen where some parties might have what you would call settlement counsel come to the mediations, not the trial counsel? You know, when earlier that Alessandra was talking about the differences in personalities, of course, which we all know that that's there. Have you seen that? And would you have any comments on that?
Yes, Alessandra is a very high-profile negotiator, and I think that's a way of considering a settlement officer. And I think that most large law offices are moving in that direction. A law office with more than 100 people, they would have a settlement officer, somebody who's there just to do the negotiations and settle the cases. But that's also comparatively new.
Yes, but that makes a lot of sense. Does anyone in the audience have a question that they would like to ask? We've got a little bit of time here. Hands raised, or just unmute yourself and speak up. We are a relatively small group here. No, okay. Well, what else might you want to share with us then, Eduardo? Oh, Alessandra's back as well. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Oh, I'm sorry, there's a thunderstorm going on down here, and I'm now being supported by my cell phone. I don't know what's going on, blackouts, I'm sorry, but it's summertime approaching us. So we start having the storms and the shortage of energy, but I'm back. I'm truly now supported by my cell phone. So well, Eduardo, what have I missed while I was
we were talking about staggered clauses.
Okay.
Basically, when you move from negotiation, you move to mediation or move into some arbitration or going to the judge. And Jean was asking me about settlement officers. And I was saying that in large firms, let's say a firm of 100 lawyers, then you may have a settlement officer. And I was referring to you as a very able and successful settlement officer, although you basically do it through negotiation and not through mediation.
Yes. Well, it's interesting. Maybe we could share also with them the fact that we do have our conciliators, what we call conciliators, and how mediation goes within the court system and outside. Maybe it's interesting for them to know that we do have mediation that is done when the lawsuit is already in progress, and you can do it inside the court system, and how you can do it outside, and the advantages and disadvantages of doing it, Eduardo. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. We used to say that mediation can be done at any time, before litigation, during litigation, and sometimes even after litigation, if you want to recover the relationship you have with them. But there's a distinct difference between court mediation in Brazil and non-judicial mediation. And basically, when you're not in a court system, you can choose your mediator. When you do it in a court system, it's somebody who is appointed by the judge. Of course, parties are called to come to the first meeting to find out what mediation is about, and then they can decide to stay or not stay. But in the court system, you're not able to choose your mediator, and you have all sorts of mediations with all sorts of backgrounds, there's all sorts of experiences. So when you're doing outside the judicial system, you have the chance of picking up the chamber you like most, which mediator within that chamber, or you can do it an ad hoc mediation, but then you can choose who is going to handle the case for you.
Yeah, and this is relevant here, Eduardo. Even before the mediation law, conciliators, the court mediators could be just anybody. And when I mean just anybody, please listen to it as really just anybody, the person without any kind of skill.
Absolutely.
I myself, having as an individual, having consumers problems, I would go to court and I would ask for that mediator, and I would just sit back and relax and see he or she do her job. And in some cases, especially before mediation law, it was really lousy job. I mean, really bad. But again, you really cannot blame them because they really lacked training. You know, the idea of mediating was just so abstract, so much in theory. They didn't know how to do it. Nowadays, you have several ways that a court mediator can get training. And by the way, they need now to have a certification, right, Eduardo?
Absolutely, yeah. And as you mentioned, still today, you have a difference between conciliators and mediators, because conciliation in Brazil is a very short process. And it works when you don't have a long-term pending relationship. If there's a car crash among people who have never seen each other, then you just need to settle an amount and that's it. But if the person you crashed into is your brother-in-law, then there's this whole different situation, because you had an ongoing relationship which you want to keep going. So the procedure has to be a more extended process. You have to deal with how people feel about each other, and you need to understand them and help them understand what's going on before you can reach a settlement.
And I really think, Eduardo, at the moment, for the time being, I think we are focusing on training for mediators, training for negotiators. This is the one important thing we must do now, because
Absolutely.
We are not 350,000, Natalie. We are many more. And we have lots of people to train in order as well to give mediation and negotiation its real value. Because if we don't do it well, people will not pursue that way. They will think that negotiation and mediation are not really something that they should seek. They should go the good old way, going to the courts and trying to litigate. So training at the moment, from my point of view, is of great relevance. It's the most important thing we must do in order to have more and more a larger community of skilled negotiators, skilled mediators, because more and more people are seeking for fast and less costly. I've been learning in my international conferences, that's what clients are looking for. They want it faster, they want it cheaper, they want it better. And surely it's not going to the courts that they are going to get this way. So at the moment, we see it, and we are, people like me and Eduardo, we are a culture changer, meaning that we are getting people to think in a different way so that in the future we'll have more and more agreements accommodating alternative dispute resolution and not only going straight to the courts as the only typical and classic way to solve their differences and conflicts. So as much as we work on the culture of ADRs, more and more, I believe we'll see agreements. And I know you were mentioning that when I got blacked out here. More and more we will have agreements and possibilities previously arranged of mediation and negotiation. That's how I see the moment we're living right now in our region here.
Well, Alessandra, you mentioned your international connections, and I know that you are a former president, for example, of the Professional Ethics Committee of the International Bar Association based in London, and you have been a guest lecturer, guest professor in Lisbon to speak about negotiation. You've graduated from the Harvard Law School, Harvard Business School of the negotiation programs there. On an international basis, and we're getting near the top of the hour. So what do you see for international? Do you see it as pretty much the same things, different things? And what might you and Eduardo have for your closing comments?
Okay, in my international experience, I see that everybody thinks that going to court is not good business. I mean, everywhere I go, this is something that I see for sure. People just don't want to take so long and spend so much in solving their problems. Last week, I was invited to be going to Africa, to Angola, to teach a group of legal professionals. And also, I go very often to Portugal, and in my international conferences, I can tell you, for example, being a member of the IBA, in our guidelines for the future of the legal profession, we state there that negotiation skills are part of legal training for any legal professional throughout the planet. So I see that it's in everybody's mind that we must move forward with the ADRs because we need them. It's a matter of survival, really. And we are talking about food here. Before I go, I'd like to restate the importance of your contribution to the food banks. I had the opportunity to talk a little bit about our local food bank here and what an exceptional work they've been doing, and they really deserve your support. I thank you for inviting me, and anytime you would like me to join you for some other talks, please feel free.
Oh, you're so kind. Thank you. And Natalie did put in the chat a second link. The first link she put into the food bank was not correct. So look for that second link in there, and that's great. Eduardo?
Yes, I'd like.
Yeah.
I've also been getting some referrals for international mediations, and it's basically because people had the experience and they referred to mediation because they couldn't solve their problems in court. They were very aggravated. So this is becoming a trend. And I'd very much like to thank Alessandra for inviting me for this talk. Thank Eugene, and thank Natalie and Saray. It was a great opportunity. I'm always available. And I really emphasize how important it is to contribute to the food banks, especially in these times of pandemic, and especially in Brazil, where the effects of the pandemic have been very serious, affecting a lot of vulnerable people. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Oh, our pleasure. Thank you is where the thanks go to, and obrigado, right? Thank you so much. And next week, everyone, it's the top of the hour. So thank you all for attending. And we'll look forward to seeing you next week, 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 p.m. Eastern time, for another great presentation. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Ciao.
Alessandra and Eduardo.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Congrats.
Bye-bye.
Great job.
Good
Great
job
job.
to you. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.